welcome to the 248th consecutive meeting of the Lexington Veterans Association. We are back in our home at the Lexington Library. Glad to see you all here. We have a wonderful program in store for you. Let us start our meeting with our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Bill Stern will lead us. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First off, I know we have several people here who are brand new and who have never been to one of our programs before. And we would like very much to welcome you and say hello and let the group welcome you as well. So if you won't find it too embarrassing, if this is your first time here, would you be willing to raise your hand, stand maybe, introduce yourself, and just, if you're a veteran, tell us your branch of service and tell us a little about yourself. I'm going to start with you.
Debbie Armstrong. I am the parent of a Marine major and pilot of an Osprey, and he's active duty at Camp Pendleton. And so I just newly retired and decided I would come check out this group.
Isn't that great? Well, Debbie, I hope you enjoy us enough that you'll become a regular. We got your email, right? So now you're on our distribution list. Wonderful. Okay. I see two newcomers in the back.
I'm Irene Hallett, and I was with the Air Force. And this is my sister, Helen Hallett. She has no military background, but she decided it. Linda invited us, and I'm tagging along, actually.
Very happy to have you both here. Anybody else here for the first time? Great.
I'm Gordon Beatty. I am not a veteran, but I'm a veteran of Lexington, having lived here for 40 years. And appreciate being invited to come.
Well, Gordon, thank you so much. Anyone else? Well, welcome. We're thrilled to have all of our new friends. Let me just go through my boilerplate announcements. We always want to say thank you to Starbucks of Lexington Center for the coffee. They've been providing complimentary coffee for more years than I can count. And also, thanks to everyone who supplies the delicious baked goods to go with the coffee. It makes for a very nice social hour before our talks. And thanks to everyone who throws a small amount of money into the basket, because that's our operating fund. That's what we use to work on for the year. We had a check-in table today. Seems to be working very well. It helps us make sure we have your current email, because sometimes we get emails tossed back, and that means some of you do not get the information from us and don't hear about our programs. So thank you for bearing with us for the check-in table. It's all to your benefit. Let me call on Gina Rada, our Veteran Services Officer for Lexington Bedford, with our monthly Veterans Update.
Good afternoon. Last month I mentioned that we had tickets were on sale for the Veterans Breakfast, which is November 5th at St. Bridget's. I brought them with me this time and to make it a little bit easier, so I will be available for you to purchase tickets. If you haven't already bought your ticket and you'd like to buy one today, you can buy one today. If you didn't bring money with you today and you want to, they'll be on sale throughout the rest of the month at the community center. And Michelson Shoes has them as well, so they're $5 a piece, and that is November the 5th. So let me know if you'd like to buy one.
Just a word about Veterans Day, which is about 1 month from now. You all received a flyer when you checked in. At this year's Veterans Day ceremony, We will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. Also, Lexington has recently been designated as a Purple Heart community, and we will be paying special tribute to Vietnam veterans and Purple Heart recipients. But we are warmly inviting all veterans to attend the November 11 ceremony at Cary Hall, 11 o'clock in the morning, as our honored guests as we pay tribute to our veterans. So if you have not received one of these invitations, my assistant, Bob, is right here with one, and we'd be very happy to hand one out.
Thank you.
Let's get to the program at hand. I'd like to tell you a little something about our speaker. Sheila Widnall is a native of Tacoma, Washington. She came to Boston to enroll at MIT. After earning a Bachelor of Science and a Doctor of Science from MIT, she became a member of the faculty in 1964, with affiliations in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics and the Division of Engineering Systems. In 1992, she was appointed Associate Provost. In 1993, Dr. Widnall was nominated by President Bill Clinton and confirmed by the Senate to serve as Secretary of the Air Force. I have to stop here. She was nominated in July. She was confirmed in August. 1 month was all that happened anymore. I'll bet it was unanimous, am I correct? You
Yes,
don't know.
I assume.
I assume it was unanimous. I mean, those were the days. Can we even think of that happening in this day and age? But she was confirmed in 1 month's time as Secretary of the Air Force, the first woman to serve as Secretary of a U.S. military service. After serving in that post for 4 years, she returned to the MIT faculty. In 1998, she was appointed Institute Professor. Dr. Widnall is a former officer and current member of the National Academy of Engineering. She's a past president of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She holds more than a dozen honorary degrees. She's a recipient of the most prestigious awards in her field. She serves on a number of boards of research, nonprofit, and defense organizations, including serving as a member of the Space Shuttle Columbia's Accident Investigation Board. During her 4 years as Air Force Secretary, Dr. Widnall focused on institutional culture, core values, and improved training, while managing a $62 billion budget and an active reserve and civilian force of 800,000. Please welcome Sheila Widnall.
So thank you. One of the first things I'm going to do is make sure my microphone works. Can everybody hear me? Okay, because I'm not worried about these hanging things. Okay, so I'm delighted to be with you today to share my experiences as Secretary of the Air Force. Wow, what a terrific job. The U.S. military is a very special institution. The statements of core values, held dear by the services, build a platform of trust within and across the services and with the American people. I know you all know these values, but I will recite them to build that platform. For the Army, loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. For the Navy and Marines, honor, courage, commitment. For the Air Force, integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. I also feel that these core values could also represent my home institution, MIT, although there is a different meaning to service before self, involving public service. The military also functions as one of the most important educational institutions in the nation. The military enrolls young people just out of high school, provides them with the education and training that they need to carry out the missions that they have chosen. And this education and training persists throughout their career as they move to higher levels with more responsibilities. At the college and university level, the role of the military is substantial. In addition to the military academies whose academic programs are excellent, the military also operates ROTC programs in most universities across the nation. These young officers graduate with the necessary skills for their first assignment, and their training continues as they progress through their careers. So, how did I become Secretary of the Air Force? And what was important to me in this role beyond flying F-16s? I was born under the final approach to McChord Air Force Base in Tacoma, Washington. The sky was full of airplanes returning from Korea and Vietnam. My mother was a juvenile probation officer. My father rode bulls in the rodeo. I guess you could say that I grew up with a passion for flight and a good bit of independence. I enrolled at MIT in 1956, received a BS and later a PhD in aerospace engineering in 1960 and then 1964. And I joined the faculty in 1964. But there's a lot more to the story of how I became Secretary of the Air Force, so I'll have to shorten it. MIT faculty are deeply engaged in outside activities, primarily as a public service. I served as president and a board member of both the AAAS and the AIAA, the American Institute for Aeronautics and Astronautics. I served on the board of several foundations, and in particular the Sloan Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation, where I was vice chairman of the board. So let's start there. Carnegie Corporation was deeply involved in seeing that the federal government received solid scientific advice for decisions across a wide range of topics. We formed the Carnegie Commission on Science, Technology, and Government in 1988. Members of this commission were outstanding individuals with deep scientific and government experience, including a future Secretary of Defense and past and future presidential science advisors. Fast forward to the election of Bill Clinton. The then chairman of the Carnegie Board was Warren Christopher, who became Secretary of State. He was also asked by President Clinton to identify individuals to serve on the cabinet and other senior posts within the government. Carnegie lost 4 board members to the new administration. Bob Rubin as Secretary of the Treasury, Donna Shalala as Secretary of HEW, myself as Secretary of the Air Force, and Warren Christopher as Secretary of State. I was in my office at MIT one day in January of 1993 when I got a call from David Hamburg, the president of Carnegie Corporation and a former president of the Institute of Medicine. He said, "Sheila, I've got a great idea." And Sam Nunn, who was chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Les Aspin, who had been tapped to be the Secretary of Defense, think it's a great idea too. And so I said, "Well, what is that, David?" And he said, "We think you should be Secretary of the Air Force." And I said, "David, that's a great idea." I had had an extensive background with the Air Force, including serving as chair of the Board of Visitors of the Air Force Academy. My technology background was a good fit, and I was excited about the opportunity to fly. Things bounced along until July, when I found myself in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee at my confirmation hearing. I was confirmed in early August and attended a White House dinner for senior military officers and defense officials that just happened to be scheduled in early August. At that time, I was on vacation in Goose Prairie, Washington. No telephone, no electricity. So they had to send the new deputy sheriff up to tell me to travel to McChord Air Force Base and fly back to DC. He thought they were kidding him when they told him to drive 20 miles from Yakima to Goose Prairie to deliver a message to the new Secretary of the Air Force. So I drove to McChord Air Force Base and flew to Washington, DC. After returning to Washington State, I next flew to Alaska to interact with the command structure and personnel at Elmendorf Air Force Base. And I got to fly supersonic in an F-15, so it was beginning. The responsibilities of the Secretary of the Air Force are as stated: to organize, train, and equip. What was important to me as Secretary: the values, the discipline, the technology, flying, and interacting with and strengthening the Air Force. One of my core accomplishments was elevating the stated core values of the Air Force Academy across the entire Air Force: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Today, when I attend an Air Force briefing, I see those core values inscribed below on the master slide. I doubt that the presenter has any understanding of my relationship to his master slide, and that's the way it should be. I was in charge of the court-martials of officers. The military regulations about the relationship between officers and enlisted or between officers are not understood by the readers of the New York Times. We had a number of difficult cases which I believed we successfully handled. The most notorious of that was that of Kelly Flynn, a B-52 pilot who had had an affair with the husband of an enlisted airman. Her superior officers went forward with the court-martial. The press went bananas. But it was eventually resolved when she accepted a general discharge rather than proceed to court-martial. Young officers often ask me why we didn't proceed to court-martial. My response was that I thought the movie would be a lot less interesting without the court-martial. I did have the opportunity to fly almost every Air Force airplane, both here and abroad. I recall taking a trip to California with President Bill Clinton on Air Force One. When he remarked that he had been able to take a nap on the plane, I remarked, well, it's a good thing you were asleep because I was flying the plane. I did extensive travel to bases in the US and abroad. I met with foreign leaders, typically secretaries of defense, senior military officers, and Air Force chiefs of staff. So let me list a few issues that might stimulate questions from the audience. First of all, in terms of the challenges faced by the Air Force constantly, it is budget and personnel. The development of new technologies and the cost overruns that are often related to those issues. During my time, we essentially saved the C-17 program from terrible overruns and turned it into a successful program. We built 200 C-17s, and I think the production line has stopped at this point. We initiated the F-22. That again became very expensive. I think we built 100 of those, and I think the production line is down. We started the F-35 program, which I dread to read about in the newspaper because every time I read about it, it's over budget, and that really concerns me. One of the things I did was to start the new launch vehicle program. When I came into the Air Force, there was really no launch vehicles available in a reliable manner to launch Air Force satellites. So we had a competition that resulted in something called the EELV program, which is basically 2 launch vehicles. A lot of press today because one of those launch vehicles has a Russian engine, so there's a lot of fights over that. We never would have chosen a launch vehicle that had a Russian engine if it was the only launch vehicle we were choosing. But we had 2 of them, so we had, in some sense, safety about launching. We developed a lot of new satellites. I think when I was there, we had just started the UAV program. And in fact, I think when I was there, UAVs were observational vehicles only. They were not weapons delivery. That has obviously developed to the point where they do, in fact, deliver weapons. It's a really big part of the Air Force, and it's just in constant use. One of the other issues that the Air Force is clearly dealing with now is how do you retire old vehicles and how do you close bases? That's always a big political argument. The A-10 is still being fought over. People still want to keep the A-10, and there's all sorts of advocates for that. The F-111, we were pretty successful in getting rid of the F-111. We gave them all to Australia. So, you know, there's no problem with the F-111. The C-141 is probably getting old, and I think that has been retired. Let me talk a little bit about the base closure process. When I was secretary, we had this process called the BRAC. I actually don't know if they're still doing that. But let me just mention that as Secretary of the Air Force, I had a certain amount of discretion with respect to base closures. So I removed Hanscom Air Force Base from the BRAC list because of its very extremely valuable interaction with Lincoln and the various electronics companies in the New England region. I thought it was a really unique opportunity for the Air Force, and so I simply removed Hanscom from the list of bases that could be considered for closure. I also removed McChord. It had nothing to do with the fact that I was born in Tacoma, but McChord is a very strong base in interaction with Fort Lewis. And in fact, I'm not following it that closely, but I think they've almost merged into a single base. McChord plays an extremely valuable role in transporting the Army from Fort Lewis into wherever they're going. One of the other issues I think that the Air Force is facing now is a pilot shortage. We need a lot of pilots to fly these UAVs, and I think they're not being treated as well as they should be treated. I think the Air Force has refused to give them the Airman's Medal because they say, well, you're not really a pilot because you're sitting in Nevada, and so there's a lot of complicated issues there, and I think it leads to problems with pilots. It leads to problems with pilot self-image, and I think it's something the Air Force is going to have to overcome. So, I remain connected with the Air Force. I typically serve as advisors to the entering freshmen in the ROTC program, as well as for several upperclassmen in Astro. And just coincidentally, this Thursday, I'm coming in at 7 o'clock in the morning to give a lecture to the current Air Force ROTC section on civilian control of the military, which seems like a very appropriate topic for me to talk about. So I'm happy to have an opportunity to meet with you today, and I'm certainly proud to have served. And I'd just like to open for questions, because I'd love to get some questions from you. Yes?
What about the role of women in the Air Force? When you came in, and how has that evolved?
Okay, yeah.
You know,
good question. Actually, I was kind of excited about that. The Chief of Staff was a guy named Tony McPeak. He was more like Clint Eastwood than anybody you could possibly imagine. And so the question was, how could I possibly get along with this guy? Well, he was born in Oregon, and I was born in Washington, and we got along really well. And I don't know if it had anything to do with me coming in, but in April of '93, before I became secretary, Tony opened the fighter pilot ranks to women. And he selected 12 women to serve as fighter pilots. They were F-15, F-16 pilots, so the door was open. And I think the Air Force has one of the largest percentages of women, both at the enlisted and officer rank. So I think, you know, in some sense, we are a model. And I assume that that has continued.
Well, I was thinking, you mentioned there's a problem in piloting
Yeah.
drone aircraft.
Yes.
And I would think that there's all sorts of opportunities
Yes.
there for people, you know.
Yes, no, I
to
think
fly.
that's right. And you know, in some sense, and I'm sure we'll get over this problem, but right now, at least the last reading I had on it was that the Air Force a lot of the, quote, officers didn't believe these people were really pilots because they didn't put their lives on the line, and they were sitting in Nevada, you know, doing the computer thing. I think we'll get past that. The UAVs are really an important part of the Air Force. I've served on 2 PhD committees of Air Force officers in our department who have been studying the use of UAVs from a safety point of view, from an effectiveness point of view. They are a clear, important tool in warfighting.
I would think there's traumatic stress involved there too, when they're actually killing people from an easy chair.
Yeah.
I mean,
I totally agree with you, but you know, we just need to get to that point. That's basically it. Yes?
Yeah, my question is along that line
Yes.
also. We hear an awful lot about suicides in the military from, it's generally people on the ground. However, the stress of UAVs and other activities in the Air Force, what is being done, and what percentage of the personnel commit suicide?
I'm not going to be able to answer that question. I just don't have the data. You know, obviously it's the whole issue of you know, sort of personnel and their enthusiasm and their sense of comfort and everything is an extremely important issue. But I'm not following the numbers, so I don't really know.
We just need to bring the microphone to you.
Oh, my.
We have one over here, Sheila.
Okay.
As an engineer, rather than as Secretary of the Air Force, what do you think about more standardization of product across the services?
Well, I think that's a real challenge. For example, I watched the development of the F-35, which is supposed to be a tri-service vehicle, and it was supposed to have commonality. And the problem, and I think it is a problem with engineers. Engineers, yeah, you know what I'm going to say. Engineers just like to twiddle with things. So the engineers that were working on the Navy version and the Marine version and the Air Force version were making changes. And actually had a student do a PhD thesis on commonality in the F-35. And I think the number of distinct parts rose to like 60%. So the initial idea was that, you know, you could have commonality and that would make the airplane more reliable and you would save money. It just didn't turn out that way because engineers were diddling with.
But isn't that something that management could control at some level?
Well, you'd hope so, but you know, again, each service kind of likes to do things their own way. So I think there are sort of fundamental issues there, and until we solve this problem, we're going to continue to have these cost overruns and delays and everything like that. No, it's a major problem. It really is a major problem.
Okay.
Yes?
Here,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
then I'm going to go over here.
Why would you choose a Russian engine for a UAV?
Okay. Well, okay. Well, first of all, let me just say that the ELD program has never had a vehicle crash. It has been the most reliable launch vehicle program that has ever been seen in the world, at least this world. I don't know what the Martians are doing, but it is the most reliable vehicle program. So when we set the program up, we got these proposals from Boeing and Lockheed. And so, you know, we would not have chosen Lockheed and their Russian engine. We just wouldn't have done that. But they came to us and they said, well, look, if you allow both of us to proceed, we will put our own money in it. You don't have to spend any more money, we will put our own money in. So they developed this Atlas launch vehicle, which has turned out to be a major success. And, you know, it's cheaper to fly than the Boeing Delta vehicle. And so, you know, we got through, what, 20 years, 10 years, maybe 15 years of really good behavior. But now we've got to solve this problem, and ULA, which is the launch vehicle provider, is in fact looking to retire the Delta and build a new vehicle called the Vulcan, which will have a new engine, won't be a Russian engine. So, you know, 5 years from now, we won't have the Russian engine. But we learned a lot from the Russian engine. The Russians knew how to make very reliable engines, didn't diddle around with, you know, a lot of changes. So we learned a lot from that engine in terms of It's probably cheaper and more efficient than the Delta engine. So we learned a lot. We had sort of 15 years of successful launches. Now we're dealing with the problem. And in the next 5 years, you'll see a new engine. So we'll solve the problem.
Okay, a comment and a question. The comment, it looks like the Air Force is opening up the drone pilot program to enlisted.
That may be true, yeah.
Yeah, the latest I've read suggests that that's going to happen.
Well, it's the computer. I mean, it's hard to imagine that, I mean, as I understand the UAV program, it's one pilot and one technician, and the two of them together kind of fly the vehicle. And so now they're saying, well, do we really need two people to do this? So I can understand why they may be switching to allow enlisted to do it. Yeah. And the Army allows enlisted to fly, right? Enlisted people flying helicopters. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think that I can understand why that's happening. Yeah.
My question, since the nation is transforming to a new air traffic control system, the ADSB, what will become of the nation's network of radar, surveillance radars, air traffic control radars?
Oh, I have no idea. It's just not my thing.
It would seem to me that the Air Force would eventually inherit those, and I don't know if they can afford to run them.
Yeah, I have no idea. It's just not an area that I know anything about. See, I gotta follow Linda. She's the one passing the she's the one passing the mic around.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but he's before you, and then you can. Yeah, then you're next.
Got two questions for you.
Yeah.
One is the life of the pilot. Are they an obsolete feature in the Air Force as far as fighter pilots? I'm not thinking in terms of the four-engine transports. But one is how that changes both the future of the Air Force and how that changes the type of person that gets promoted in the Air Force. And the other question is, when you're talking about hardware, to what degree does the Air Force or the Defense Department have everything made in the U.S., or how susceptible are we to just not having parts in time of combat?
Okay, let me, I think I can deal with that one first. My understanding is that we buy all of our parts from the United States. I mean, the Russian engine is definitely an exception, and it was very unusual, but, you know, we build them, and not only do we build them, we don't sell them outside of the United States. I mean, there are very, very strict regulations about selling parts that have any national security relationship outside the United States. And so, you know, I think we control our own technology. The other thing, I mean, yeah, some of my best friends are fighter pilots. I think they are kind of the image of the Air Force, and they will remain the image of the Air Force for a very long time. I don't think there's any question about that. And as we move into these other areas, basically what we have to do, I mean, my understanding is now that fighter pilots, you know, they have a tour of duty, and then their next tour of duty is a UAV pilot, and then they go back to a tour of duty as a fighter pilot. So they bounce back and forth. So they're still, you know, acting as, you know, in some sense, the image of the Air Force. So I'm not worried. 20 years from now, there may be a whole different story. As we get more and more, you know, technology and more, you know, information and automation. I just don't know where that's going. Let's see, now I saw you had a...
How much does it cost to train a fighter pilot now and maintain him and retire him?
Well, the last time I saw that number, and I'm just talking about the training part, the number I saw was $3 million. Now that may have gone up because of inflation.
Back in the 50s it was $10,000.
Yeah, no, it was, and the reason I know that is because we had some fighter pilots who got themselves into trouble and we had to fire them, and so we figured, well, we're losing $3 million that we've already spent. So I think it's a number like that.
I think I still see some of the old B-52s flying around the seacoast in Maine and New Hampshire.
Yeah, right.
Could you comment on
Well,
where they're going? And
I just read a newspaper article the other day, and I don't know if it was you I was talking to, but they are taking B-52s out of storage in Davis-Monthan, and they are refurbishing them, and they are putting new engines in them, and they are continuing to use them. When I was an undergraduate at MIT, and during my freshman year, I worked at Boeing on the B-52, and it was already, you know, a fully flying vehicle.
they're 60 years old now, aren't they?
Yeah, right. They are. But you know, I was working on. I think the problem was that when they got up to too high altitude, the fuel couple would break, and that's obviously very dangerous. So, no, they're very old. But the people who fly them just love them. So they've got a very good advocacy group.
Are they still part of our weapons system?
Oh yeah, definitely part of the weapons system. Yeah, no, they're definitely part of the weapons system. And as I say, they're pulling them out of storage at Davis-Monthan, and they are putting new engines in them, and yeah. And in fact, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if the B-52 outlived the B-1. I think there are lots of problems with the B-1, so I think the B-52 will actually outlive the B-1. Yeah. I don't know, is he next? I mean, I think he's next.
A quick question on retention and training. It costs a lot of money to train folks.
It does.
And then, of course, they leave to go work for American Airlines and so forth.
Yeah.
Is there any effort to increase the pay?
I have no idea. Yeah, no, I mean, I just simply don't know. I'm sure that there's somebody in the Pentagon who's looking at those issues, trying to make sure that we retain pilots. But I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the numbers are.
Yeah, you had one B-52 right in front of the Air Force Academy, right? So you can always recycle that one.
I can't remember. Yeah, I've been to the Air Force Academy. I don't remember the B-52.
Well, my question, is the Air Force, who's in charge of missile defense? You know, I hear about the Russians moving things closer to the poles, and, you know, missile defense, when we look at North Korea, is kind of a scary subject. Is it the Air Force, or who
Well, yeah, speaking about what I'm going to talk about on Thursday, civilian control of the military. You know, in some really fundamental way, it is the President, the Secretary of Defense, the Advisor to National Security, who makes those recommendations based on the concerns, the numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, if an order is given to move them, they'll move them. That's what they do. But I don't know who's, you know, sort of...
It's not the Air Force who's...
no, it might be the Air Force. No, I don't really know. I mean, I saw an announcement the other day that, I think it was one of the 3-star generals was appointed head of the Missile Defense Agency, so that sounds like the Air Force has a major role in that. But I don't know the details.
It's always been the Army, hasn't it?
I don't know. I mean,
It's on the ground, it's the Army.
What?
The Patriot missile is the Army.
Oh, yeah, the Patriot missile is but no, I think you're talking about...
I'm talking about just our overall national air defense system and the parts that we
the small ones are the
NATO
Army, and the big ones are the Air Force.
It's on a ship.
And it's the Navy.
Air Defense Command is Major Air Force.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm sure we could all look this up on Wikipedia and figure out what it is. Yes.
What effect do you think women in combat is going to have,
Say
if any? What effect do you think women in combat is going to have, if any?
Well, what I would do is ask the women.
Ask the women?
Ask the women. Do they want to serve? Do they feel comfortable serving? Do they make a contribution? I mean, it's clear that the services are moving towards opening all roles to the women. And I guess the other comment I would make is, if you look at the things that happen in places like Iraq, it's very hard to distinguish between the fighting and the support roles, right? And I suspect that as many women have been killed driving trucks as have been killed, you know, shooting rifles. So I think our whole situation is becoming much more complicated. The Air Force opened all the flying roles to women, and that was in 1993. So that's you know, done.
The Air Force is slightly different because
Yeah,
you
it
do
is.
go back to a base. versus
Yeah.
if
No,
you're
it
in
is.
a rock, you're
Right.
in an outer spot, and you're there with 6, 8, whatever
Yep. No,
Number
that's
of
right.
other people.
Right, it's like a camping trip.
Well, yeah, I guess you could describe it that way. I mean, there's all this rhetoric about, oh my gosh, you know, is it going to disturb the guys?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just not involved in that. But, you know, I think it's a problem that can be overcome. If we have the need to make that happen, I think we can make it happen. Let's see, he's got a mic.
Sheila, most of us don't think very much about the Minuteman silos anymore, but they're still out there.
Yeah.
Periodically,
Yeah.
there's a scandal related to discipline, related to morale, related to security.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is that an old, long-standing issue? Was that an issue while you were secretary?
No, I don't remember that. No, I mean, my court marshal was a female B-52 pilot. I don't remember any problems with people in the silos. But I have read a lot recently about the concern about upgrading the technology in the silos and re-looking at the health of our nuclear system. And that probably follows some of the concern about the Russians and their nuclear program. So I have read a lot recently about examining our nuclear program and upgrading it, and that would include the silos. Okay. Okay.
We recently had an excellent speaker from the National Guard, and he told us how it is and its function and its size equivalent to the Air Force. And I just wondered if you have any comment on how that's working out.
Not any particular comment. I mean, you know, I was certainly impressed with the National Guard. I have, you know, I'm very familiar with some of their units. I have a graduate student who's part of the F-16 unit up in Burlington, and, you know, I think when we need them, we call on them. So I think they're a tremendous asset.
I think we've missed something in the introduction of you.
Yeah.
How did we get the honor of having you speak here?
Oh, you asked me.
How did they know where you were?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, look me up on Wikipedia. I have no idea. But
You don't live in Lexington,
I do live in Lexington.
Oh.
Yeah, I live in Lexington. I don't run around. I don't carry a sign around saying former Secretary of the Air Force. But you know, people know. I have a lot of friends in Hanson, you know, and I speak, like I spoke to the ROTC unit at University of Lowell. That was really fun. They have a great ROTC unit at Lowell, and they were having their final awards dinner and stuff, so I went up to speak to them. So I almost always say yes.
I'll just add that Bill Johansson, our former and currently deceased leader, I think Bill made the invitation. So somehow you were on his radar.
Okay.
And of course he has files this thick on really good potential speakers. So,
yeah.
But you know, you said something very simple. Somebody asked you, which means aim high. And it's amazing who will say yes. Okay, you're next. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Let's just
Here
make
to
sure
comment
we
on
get
the
someone.
challenges faced by the current Secretary of the Air Force, Deborah James, versus the challenges that you faced when you were
I
Secretary.
don't really know. You know, I'm not keeping up with it. It sounds like she's doing very well. I read, you know, in sort of preparation for my talk to the ROTC unit on Thursday, I tried to bring myself up to date on a lot of things that were going on. But as far as I could tell, everything was fine. I mean, changes in Air Force regulations to, you know, deal with, you know, forced retirement and stuff like that. So no, I think she's doing fine.
Okay, next.
You mentioned the F-35
Yes.
in your talk, and I have a long experience as a software engineer in aerospace, and there's been a chronic problem of cost overruns and budget delays. And I had read some time ago now that the F-22 has approximately 20 million lines of code in the onboard computers.
Yeah.
And that just boggles my mind. I mean, The way I think of it is, I wonder if it works at all.
Well, how big is your computer?
You've got to be, as a net software director, you've got to be very careful in measuring lines of code. Sometimes somebody gets an operating system, uses that in an onboard computer, and then counts those lines of code. So you've got to be very careful how the lines are counted.
Why wouldn't you count it?
Well, you would.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would.
The reason you wouldn't count it is because you did not develop those lines of code for the program, and the program did not have to pay for the development of those lines of code.
But those lines of code must work.
Yeah, they must work,
under
right?
all
Yeah,
conditions.
right. Yeah, no, we're in a different era. There's just no question about it, and we have to learn how to operate in that era.
Well, the other troubling thing was I read, you know, I keep reading about the problems with the F-35, and the operating envelope is constrained now.
Yeah.
And apparently the reason for that is the software.
That may be, again, I'm not following it, but I think the problem that I find frustrating is that it takes so long to develop one of these things that by the time you get to here, the software is out of date. And so you have to go back to the beginning and do it all over again. So, I mean, I think that's, would you agree with that?
No. No, because the two are developed in parallel. So if the hardware changes and the hardware goes through a design review and that requires a software mod, then they'll work synchronously.
In the ideal case.
And usually the software takes less time than the hardware.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. My observation is that the software is usually behind the times in terms of what it needs to be able to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess that.
Bill first,
Okay.
then George.
On the Columbia loss,
Yes.
it seemed to me, if I remember correctly, there was imagery of a substantial chunk of ice hitting the leading edge of that aircraft as it launched. Yet it seemed to me that they made no effort to inspect the exterior while it was in space to judge whether it was fit for re-entry or not.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I don't know when they discovered the ice. I think they did it after the crash, but I don't know that for a fact. But I'm not sure they inspected the video from the flight before the crash, so they wouldn't have known about the ice.
Could one not turn a reconnaissance satellite against the shuttle and inspect it?
I don't think they had any suspicion that there was a problem. I just don't think they had.
I kind of recall having my own suspicion before
Yeah.
the thing re-entered.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure they had any suspicion that there was a potential problem until re-entry. I don't know that for a fact, but that's the general sense I have based on the data that we had, and the video obviously was very persuasive, but I don't know when that video was generated.
So what's the conclusion, why it crashes?
Oh, you don't know the conclusion?
No, I guess I don't know.
Okay, so basically what happened is, and I actually can't remember why it happened. I guess it was unusually cold or something when they launched, but there was ice formation on the shuttle, not the shuttle vehicle, but the rocket that takes the shuttle up. And there was a place where the shuttle was joined to the rocket, and it was just a place where ice could form.
The O-rings.
Yeah, the O-ring, something like that.
Find out, describe that in detail.
Yeah, well, I know, and I was on the committee, so I should know it, but there was ice forming at the junction between the shuttle and the launch vehicle. And so when the shuttle took off and got up in the atmosphere, the ice came off, and it put a hole in the leading edge of the shuttle vehicle. And that's no problem if you're in space. You can have a hole in the wing of the shuttle in space. But when you re-enter, then basically what happens when you re-enter, then you get enormous heating along the leading edge of a wing when you're re-entering at Mach 25. And so it started burning up the various parts of the wing, and it just broke up.
So it chunk of ice hit the wing.
Yeah.
At the leading edge, right. And it was a fascinating thing to be involved in. I think what I remember is that NASA basically believed that ice could not damage the leading edge. They just said, no, this could never happen. That wing would never be damaged by ice. And then we ran an experiment where we, and they wouldn't give us hardware because they said, well, we don't have a lot of hardware to give you, but we said, we want to run a test. We want to fire something at the wing and see if the wing breaks. And so we did that, and it broke. And the guy who was in charge of, the analysis of the wing broke into tears because he was so surprised that you could break the leading edge of the wing on an experiment like that. So, I mean, that was just one of these moments.
My recollection is that there was a lot of discussion as to whether there was a problem or not while the thing was still up there.
I don't remember that. I just literally do not remember.
Yeah, I mean, it just seemed like it was kind of dereliction of duty.
Yeah, I just don't, I can't certify that. I just really don't remember. But certainly when it came in, it started to break up over California.
I have a different kind of question for you.
Yeah.
7 or 8 years ago, I had occasion to be at the National Strategic Forum, I believe it is called. And part of that, I got to fly a mock F-22.
You're lucky. I never got to fly an F-22.
And,
a mock F-22. Okay.
Link trainer in our parlance. But there's no joystick, there's no wheel, there's no stick. You got a little joystick over to the right.
Okay.
And you have a screen in front of you and a windshield about 75 feet in front of that. And so I'm flying this plane just like I was sitting in my living room or sitting in Denver with a drone. And in talking with all the pilots, most of whom are colonels getting ready to be generals, the conversation gets on to flying in Iraq, wiping out entire subdivision, just like the screen that I had where I never saw the enemy. All I saw was the blips on the screen, and I took them out. They never saw me. They never knew I was in the air. And I came away from that very much in dread of a mind that is like watching the games, that humans don't exist. This is all something in Never Never Land. And I'm wondering if there's any concern within your realm that we become too sensitized and start making decisions that are not based on human reality.
Well, let me just, I understand exactly what you're saying, but we were doing this in Dresden. We've been doing this for a very long time, and I think, you know what I'm talking about, World War II.
Yes.
So, the Air Force has been tasked with, carpet bombing of one form or another, and, it is a problem, but in some sense, it's our job, it's our mission. Now, I don't know a lot about UAVs, but my understanding about UAVs is that the decision to fire is not up to the pilot. It has to be certified by a higher authority. And so the pilot has to give all the information, intelligence, and describe, what he thinks he's got before he's given permission to fire. But, what can I say? It's war. And we were doing this in World War II. I guess we weren't doing it in World War I. Maybe we tried to do it, but we didn't have the equipment. It's a problem. It really is a problem. But
We were doing
we
it
just
in the
deal with
trenches.
it.
We were doing it in the trenches in World War I.
Yeah, so, you know, I mean, it's not a happy thing to be involved in. If we can avoid it, we should.
Yeah, I was gonna say that we were doing it in World War I with the long-range cannons.
Yeah.
In other words, the firers were
Yeah.
detached from it, and then from the World War II, there was always an argument that the fellows in the airplanes, they didn't know what they were killing down there, whereas the guys on the ground, they were facing it all the time.
Yeah.
So that's been around.
They could see further.
There were some big bombers too in World War I,
Yeah.
towards the end of the World War I.
Yeah, no, I think it is a problem, but, you know, we have to come to grips with it, and we have to do our best to deal with these issues. Yes?
What's the toughest decision you had to make as Secretary of the Air Force?
Oh, you know, it's almost impossible to answer that question. Obviously, there were a number of court-martials that were taking place. There were a number of promotions that had to be decided. A number of, you know, acquisition problems. You know, I think, you know, it's just a whole range of things. Nothing stands out as being really unique and singular.
How about 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Tell us about inter-service rivalry.
Ah, interesting. Well, you know, obviously the military services are deeply holistic in their particular service. And there are situations where we have to...
Answer the commonality question.
Pardon?
Answer the commonality question.
Oh, the commonality, well, I was... Oh, you mean...
Commonality, we talked about it earlier.
Well, that particular commonality is kind of a special case because it deals with a particular vehicle which was supposed to go for all 3 services.
That was a concept back in the 60s.
Yeah, I think if you broaden the word commonality to include all the missions that the services have to perform, it's a much more complicated issue. So I'm not quite sure what your question is.
Well, inter-service rivalry, you didn't want commonality because the Air Force didn't want their little package looking anything like the Army's.
No, I don't think that's what it was.
Well,
I think it was the...
when we were actually doing it on the ground.
I think it was the engineers were diddling around. You know, really, the engineers that were doing the Navy plane, they were in charge of the control systems. The engineers that were doing the Air Force plane, they were in charge of the control systems. They just used different widgets. And that's what led to a growth in you know, sort of uniqueness of the airplanes. So, but that's just a special case of a particular airplane that should have been more common than it was. But the broader question about, you know, how do we work together to solve problems, that's a much more complicated problem.
Did you have to answer questions at Congress?
Yeah, oh sure.
Very often?
Yeah, yeah.
Was that a problem?
No, I mean, it's part of the job. I mean, you know, it's basically the budget. It has to do with the budget. We didn't have any controversies. I was never in front of Congress on a controversy. In fact, the thing I most remember about being in Congress was I was testifying, I think it was the House, and I got a little note from one of my staff that 19 people had been killed at Khobar Tower, the explosion at Khobar Tower in Saudi Arabia. And I started to cry and just canceled the hearing because it was such a big deal. So no, I didn't have any problems with Congress. So, I mean, there were no controversies. You know, they didn't go after me the way some people are going after other people.
Well, those were the days. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up. If you have any other questions, perhaps Sheila will stick around for 5 minutes or so, and you can have some private time with her. Thank you so much. Let's give our speaker a big hand.